So I did the regular camera comparison between the Redmi K30 Pro, Poco F2 Pro, and the Xiaomi Mi 10. And with the stock camera, we can see that there is definitely a tangible difference between these two devices. You guys wanted to do a GCam comparison, so we're going to start this GCam comparison off right now during the daytime. Now this first picture that I'm going to try taking, it's a bright lake, bright sky, and we have trees. So how well can we get the detail from the shadows in the trees and get the detail in the sky? Let's do it. Okay, because you guys are going to ask, on the Poco F2 Pro, I'm using GCam by Unix 1.7, no custom XML, HDR enhanced, forced on with 25 frames of stacking, and I'm going to use the same HDR setting for both of these cameras. First, we're going to shoot the ultra wide. Now, we're not going to tap on anything. Both of them have the same metering modes. Okay, GCam is pretty good. We're going to switch to the regular camera. You guys are going to have to be the judge. Now it's time to use the Mi 10. Now we're going to use both of these cameras for just kind of some random daytime street photography. I'm going to keep all of my exposure parameters the same, meaning if I click on a specific part of the image, I'm going to keep that on both cameras and just get some general daytime outdoor snaps. I'm expecting that both of these cameras are going to have pretty similar results because they're going to be able to use their base ISO and the highest shutter speed. I don't want to get too nerdy and too in-depth and technical in this part of it because we're going to save that for back in the studio.
Damn, are you guys enjoying this video and you want to support me? Best way to do that is hit the subscribe button. If you guys want to interact with me, Twitter is an excellent place to do so. Also, check out my Telegram channel in the description down below. And if you guys want to put some money into my pocket, just use my affiliate links. Okay, back to the video. Okay guys, back in the studio, and a lot of this test would still hold valid for the Xiaomi Mi 10 Pro as well as the Mi 10 that I have. It would also hold true for the Redmi K30 Ultra, as the IMX 682 is going to be quite similar to the 686, but just with some different video capabilities. From my daytime GCam tests, and I will have links in the description down below as well as in the comments to my website where I'm going to put up some of these sample images for you guys to look at yourself. But I did not notice a huge difference between the Mi 10 and the Poco F2 Pro during the daytime. Now, I did see some minor differences in dynamic range, but the differences in dynamic range are far from drastic. And I think that a lot of that could come with, if you exposed for the highlights and then recovered the shadows, you might get similar performance. Now, that said, you are going to have significantly more detail with the Xiaomi Mi 10, being that the 108 megapixels is downsampled to 24 or 27 megapixels, and the 64 megapixels from the IMX 686 is then downsampled to 16 or 18 megapixels. I'm gonna mess that up. And so you're gonna have more detail with the Mi 10, more megapixels, more detail. The dynamic range is something that we are still seeing a difference on, even though both of these cameras are set to the 25 exposure bracket for the HDR enhanced. We are still seeing a little bit extra dynamic range coming out of the Mi 10. Let's go ahead and go to the low light comparison and go a little bit nerdier with this.
So we're back at Caveman Custom to do some GCam night photography and test both of these cameras' hand holdability in low light. And we are going to do some uneven lighting to see how it deals with white balance as well. And we're going to be keeping this more strictly to HDR plus and night mode on both of these devices.
going through and taking pictures with both of these devices in low light using the HDR enhanced as well as the night mode, there was a couple of things that stood out to me. The first one is that because the Mi 10 has OIS, the camera is taking a longer exposure. Now you can change and you can alter how long of an exposure that's going to be in GCam a little bit, but I noticed that if I wasn't holding the Mi 10 completely still, that I was getting motion blur. And I think the reason for that is coming from the fact that it does have OIS, and because of that, some of the defaults in the XML file I was using for that version of GCam are letting it take a longer exposure because it's using the optical image stabilization to make up for the hand holdability. Whereas on the Poco F2 Pro, I was having a shorter shutter speed, so thus I was getting less motion blur, but you could very easily fix that with the Mi 10. And even then, I think that because the Mi 10 has more resolution, if you have a slightly shakier image with more resolution, when you zoom in more to the detail, you can see that shakiness. Whereas with a lower megapixel image, you have just less detail overall. So that's definitely something to keep into account. In regards to noise and in regards to like dynamic range at higher ISOs, again, we are seeing the Poco F2 Pro lose out ever so slightly still for dynamic range. The high ISO and noise from these two images, or from the cameras in general, again, because we have more resolution, we have more detail, even with the noise that's introduced. That said, we still have better noise performance because we're getting a stronger signal coming from the camera sensor that we're digitally turning up, but we have to digitally turn it up less on the Mi 10. The reality is that the sensor of the Mi 10, even though it is considerably larger, it is very much an incremental upgrade over the IMX686. This is not worlds apart.
Nerd alert!
Part of this has to do with the actual pixel size. While pixel binning is great and it does give you more detail, in the DSLR world and in the world that I function in normally, there's a pretty common, it's pretty commonly acknowledged that if you have a lower megapixel sensor with larger pixels, you are going to get a stronger signal coming from the image sensor that is then digitally turned up. We could have a camera on the Xiaomi Mi 10 if the sensor was the same size as it is currently, but instead of having 108 megapixels, we had like 12 megapixels or 14 megapixels, and they were really, really big pixels. We would not necessarily get better daylight dynamic range, but we would get better low light, high ISO performance. We would get better video performance because the pixels again are larger. And on top of that, you get much better dynamic range in low light with bigger pixels because they're able to gather more light and thus put out a stronger signal. Unfortunately, because of marketing, I don't know if we're going to see cameras doing that. I thought that it was a pretty interesting move that Xiaomi went with a 48 megapixel yet physically larger sensor in the Mi 10 Ultra than they did in the Mi 10 Pro. And that really, I think, without going too much into the nerdiness about this, the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, it's got three 12 megapixel sensors. And it's the most expensive phone on the market right now at $2,000. If you apply what I know from the DSLR world and from the world of filmmaking to cameras and you drop the marketing hype, I would love to see 16 megapixel image sensors that are the same size as the image sensors we have right now, because they would give us so much better video. They would give us much better dynamic range in low light. And then on top of that, being able to combine those advantages with smart computational photography would mean that you could very possibly rival a cheap to inexpensive like pocket camera like the Sony RX100, or even some cheap like interchangeable lens cameras with a cell phone in just regards to like low light, dynamic range, and low light, high ISO performance for still photography.
Damn, partner, you might be sad that this video is over, but don't worry. Go ahead and check out this video right here. It might be a camera comparison, or check out this video right here where I talk about headphones. Either way, I'll wait for you.
Still waiting.